an effort that is funded by the Federal Delaware River Basin Restoration Program and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And we have a project team that I'm going to quickly announce. There's a bunch of us. The primary recipient of the grant is the Sullivan County Department of Planning and Environmental Management. And that's Fred Eisenberg, who was on the last call, but I don't believe is on this call. But Heather Jaxie, the chief planner for that division in Sullivan County government, is with us tonight and available to answer any questions that folks might have. Friends of my organization, Friends of the Upper Delaware River, and Trout Unlimited are two of the contracting implementers of the project in addition to Sullivan County. And our FUDRs, and I think our entire team is on the call tonight. I'll quickly rip through their names and they can all wave real quick. Molly Oliver will be here in a second. She's point on this program, and Jillian Pagnotti is our day-to-day person. State Sherry Rusty Thomas is here with us. Rochelle Dufton is here with us, and Kylie Romanowski is also here with us. So we got the whole gang here from FUDR. And then from Trout Unlimited, Tracy Brown, who many of you know, who's the restoration manager. I don't think she's with us tonight. Is Jesse with us tonight? Jesse Vidala is the engagement coordinator from Trout Unlimited. So we got a whole bunch of folks, good folks leading this effort. As I said, it's our second in a series of meetings. I think the first 3 meetings are Zoom, and then the third one will be coming pretty quickly. And then we're using these first 3 meetings to try to give us some basic background on watersheds and watershed planning and how streams work. You'll hear from a couple of speakers in just a moment, and we'll kick into that discussion. And then in the second series of meetings, numbers 4, 5, and 6, we're going to try to get a little more up close and personal with you. We're going to try to have face-to-face meetings where we might do things like we did up here in our similar effort that we did up here in the tailwaters up in Delaware County, where we went to many, we had many meetings in the small villages and towns around here, and we actually put out maps on the table, and we asked people to kind of just, from their personal knowledge and decades of living here to talk about the watershed through their eyes and what they see and things they remember. It was a really handy way of getting some very local knowledge about some of the characteristics of the watershed and the places and points of vulnerability and that sort of thing. So that's what we hope to do in the spring, similar exercise with this Never Sink plan that we are hoping to put together in a year's time. So in the fall will be the last series of meetings. And we, at that point, expect that we will have a draft of the plan that we can start sharing with the interested public and interested watershed stakeholders, which is all of you, and hopefully many more. There's many people on this call I know who've been through these kinds of planning processes and know that the strength of the final product really relies on the input from as broad a representation as we can get from the watershed. So we're really happy that both our first meeting and this meeting is really well attended. The plan really does rely on you to give it energy and to give it legs when it's finished. It's, by the way, not in any way a regulatory document. It is it's a voluntary management blueprint that is devised with a collaborative spirit for people who love the Never Sink River, and for use by everybody, like government agencies, local governments, and conservation organizations, and streamside landowners, and everybody who lives in the watershed and has a stake in the watershed. So as you heard, the meeting is being recorded. It will be available on the FUDR website, as will all the meetings. And I think with that, we're just going to jump in. Jan Dodici is a fish and wildlife biologist from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and works pretty closely with us and has for a number of years. And Jan's going to give us a little tutorial on the basics of stream dynamics. So Jan, if you're ready to go, you can jump right in. Questions, please use the chat box. I hope everybody knows how to use that. At any time, you can enter a question in the chat box, and when Jan is finished, we will have some time and we can run through those questions and hopefully provide good answers for them.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. I will carry on unless they hear otherwise. My name is Jan Dodici. I'm a biologist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Our office is here in Cortland, New York. And I primarily implement our Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. We do habitat restoration on private lands. We work with NGOs like Fooder, Trout Unlimited, Finger Lakes Land Trust, Otsego Land Trust, and Land Trust all across the state, and private landowners to implement habitat restoration projects. I primarily do stream work, stream restoration work, and fish passage work. So stream dynamics, that's a topic that, they probably teach college classes about. You could spend, months talking about it. And now I have to try to condense fluvial geomorphology, talking about how streams work in 25 minutes. So this is obviously just going to be a 1,000-mile view, just a really broad overview. I'm just trying to touch on some of the basics of fluvial geomorphology, how streams function. We take a functional approach to streams, and I'm going to go a little bit into that functional approach, and just again discuss the basics of fluvial geomorphology and why it matters when we're working with watersheds and streams. So fluvial geomorphology is just our understanding of rivers and how they work, how they're influenced by the landscape in which they occur. So every landscape is different potentially. You have very forested landscape, very developed landscapes, very steep hilly landscapes, flat landscapes, and every landscape, the way the water interacts with that landscape varies. And so fluvial geomorphology just kind of gives us a foundation for an understanding of how all those factors interact. What makes a healthy stream? Having good access to a floodplain or a flood-prone area, having stable banks, stable beds. You don't have aggradation or degradation of bed material. Sediment transport's in balance. When material moves through, it moves through the system. There's good in-stream habitat, flow diversity, and you have typically a healthy riparian buffer. Streams are complex. Can you see my mouse moving here? Do I have to engage the pointer? There's probably no mouse. Let me see. Does that work?
Yeah.
So you have,
Yes,
so you have the main channel. The low flow channel is what we see 90% of the year. But this is where all the aquatic organisms that, as a biologist with the Fish and Wildlife Service, this is where they, those water dependent species live in this low flow channel, that floodplain channel, that bankful channel. And then off to the sides, this is all part of the active, this flood prone area is all part of that active river system. It has to deal with water moving through, sediment moving through, and I'm going to touch on some of these things in a little bit here. So this functional pyramid, we look from the broad scale, the hydrology, and I'm going to talk about all these briefly. And we look at it as this, it's built on the hydrology, which is the watershed, the input into the watershed. So basically precipitation, rain, any groundwater that's coming out. The hydraulics are how that water interacts with the stream channel and its floodplain. The geomorphology refers to those in-channel features, the sediment, the wood, all of those things in the channel. The physiochemical is basically the chemistry of the stream. And, ultimately the biology, which is what, again, what we're charged with kind of overseeing and what I'm working towards, and all the habitat I'm creating for fish and, other wildlife critters. You can't really do anything in the stream for the biology without addressing, or at least looking and recognizing all of these other influences on that system. So, the hydrology again is the transport of water from the watershed. So when it rains, how does that water move through the landscape, enter into the stream systems, and then ultimately flow downstream towards the, wherever the end goal is, whether it's a reservoir that then impounds it, or whether, a normal stream will flow on down and, ultimately into the Delaware River and out into the Atlantic Ocean in the case of the Neversink. So I'm not sure. So one of the ways we measure this hydrology is with these flow duration curves, these runoff hydrographs. And just to orient you here, flow is on this left axis here. Flow goes up over time. So if you get a rain event, so these two bars are just denoting a given rain event in a relatively undeveloped watershed. This is just a snapshot of kind of the upper Neversink. You have this response as it rains, that water hits the landscape. It infiltrates into the ground. Some of it runs off, and you get more and more water into the stream channel. And then over time that dissipates. As you move down the watershed and you get more and more development, more impervious surface, more water, the same amount of rain now, as it comes in, it hits that river a lot quicker. So you get this higher peak. The total volume of water, the sum under this curve, if you're a math person, is that total volume of water. That doesn't change, but what changes is the magnitude of that. So instead of having a flood that peaks out here, you have a flood that happens a lot more quickly and peaks out at a higher stage. So you end up with potentially more flood damage with the same amount of rain, but it's just a function of that landscape. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a developed urban landscape. It could be a desert system where you don't have vegetation, where you have these flash floods because there's nothing to basically hold that water in. You have very pervious soils. Everything goes through quickly, hit the stream system, so you get these high peaks. But these different flow hydrographs are kind of a good way of illustrating how you can have in a similar watershed, just as a result of higher runoff, more development, you end up with these higher discharges. So you potentially get more effect from flooding. The hydraulic step 2 of the pyramid refers again to how water moves through this channel. So now you just have an active channel. There's floodplain off to the left and right. So how water is transported through the channel, through the sediments, relates to floodplain connectivity, flow dynamics in that system, and then this groundwater surface water interaction. Natural stream corridors are dynamic. They're in the state of dynamic equilibrium. They do shift a little bit. Natural streams, there's an erosion rate. You can go out and measure it, and usually it's tenths of a foot a year. It's not a big number, but they are dynamic. They're not stable, nothing static. Things move around, but if you have room in a valley for the stream to meander, it can do so without impacting infrastructure. So part of this is having good floodplain connectivity. So you can, this is the main channel through here, kind of following my pointer around. And you can see it's very low velocity, very low gradient. As that water reaches flood stage, it comes out onto this big floodplain. So the velocity never gets any higher than this. All that water is dissipated out onto the floodplain. Sediments are dissipated into the floodplain. So having good connectivity is a good way to minimize or to mitigate flooding downstream by just allowing that water to dissipate on the landscape in these connected these connected riparian wetland areas where that water can be stored and kept and stopped from going down and causing potential flooding. But I mentioned geology earlier in steep mountainous systems like you have down there in Sullivan County and in the Neversink, you have these steep mountains, and there isn't necessarily room for extensive floodplains, but you have these flood prone areas. So as the flood stage comes up, it still goes out onto these flood prone areas where it interacts with the trees and wood, and that slows that water down. So, then back into the channel now, just looking at flow dynamics, how that water interacts with the bed and banks. And when we look at streams, we're trying to take into account these various flow values, the stream velocity, shear stress, and stream power. And so velocity is just a function of the channel slope. So how steep the slope is. A flatter channel across a landscape has less slope, so the velocity will be less for any size channel. As you steepen that, velocity, gravity kicks in and things go faster and faster. So the steeper you are, the faster water flows down it. Channel dimensions again, a big wide channel, shallow channel is going to have slower moving water than a small pipe or, you know, a small confined channel. So velocity is a function of slope and the size of that active channel. Shear stress is the amount of force being applied to an object. So as that water moves through that river or through that channel, the higher the shear stress. So the more water, the higher the water is on it, the more shear stress you have. So the more ability that stream has to move a particle. So high shear stress means that it's likely to move large particles. And stream power is then just velocity times shear stress. So it's basically just the channel's ability to move sediment through. So I included this picture here just to show how, you know, as a river's coming down, you can see how this river upstream kind of has access to, you know, a little floodplain over here, flood prone area. So as water comes up, it spreads out, slows down. Now it hits this area of hardened stream bank. So it narrows everything up. So now you have a smaller channel, the same amount of water is coming through, smaller channel. You know, what's going to happen to that velocity? It's going to accelerate through there. So that shear stress goes up, the power goes up, and you end up, you know, with potentially more scour under here. So you have to put more rock in. And so this is, I think, is just a good picture to illustrate that, you know, you can have the same stream have lower velocity up here than down here just because of this kind of constriction. And in nature, you get natural constrictions where, you know, boulders in a mountainous stream will constrict it and accelerate water through. But, you know, we do that all on our own. So geomorphology just talks about the transportation of wood and sediment in the channel to create diverse habitat. You know, it's the capacity of the stream to move sediment. You know, geomorphology, as channels evolve, channels change and move, and I'll talk a little bit about channel evolution in a minute. You know, that's part of this geomorphology. Stream bank erosion rates, lateral erosion. You know, erosion is usually a big deal in places because there's usually infrastructure by bridges or by rivers, and these streams, as they're moving, you know, as a result of impacts or just high water, you know, these erosion rates become important things to measure and understand. So any change to the stream power. So if you go in and you dredge a stream and you try to straighten it and move it out, you know, you're increasing the stream slope, maybe decreasing the channel size a little bit. So you increase velocity. So you have these changes dynamics. And as, you know, slope increases or decreases, as sediment inputs increase and decrease, you get these changes in this kind of mass balance, this lanes balance model. You know, it's a stable stream, everything stays around zero. There's no net aggradation, you know, no deposition of material or no degradation, no cutting down through that stream bed. Things stay relatively stable. But when things start to change, you get out of that equilibrium and you can end up with areas of aggradation where you get big deposits of material, or areas of degradation where you get material getting cut down. You lose access to a floodplain, so you increase stream power. And that all leads to this channel evolution. And channel evolution is, you know, it's basically just showing how channels change over time as a result of some impact to the system. So whether it's, you know, a strip mall goes in, or whether it's a, you know, a little patch of forest was clear cut, or maybe it was just a big flood that took out some riverbank that caused instability. You get this evolution. And why this is important is because if you're trying to fix a stream or work in a stream, it's important to know where you are in this evolution of the stream morphology to try to know what a potential stable end restoration project would look like. These channels in the middle, these G's and F channels, this is just a nomenclature we use to describe channels. These tend to be unstable. So if you're in a situation where you have a G channel or an F channel, a really wide channel with high banks, no floodplain connectivity, trying to stabilize these is really difficult, and it's next to impossible. You know, what the strategy should be is to try to get to a stable form, this C channel or this E channel, where you're then working with natural processes to move sediment through and to move material. So knowing where you are, and there are different types of channel evolution models, this is just one of them, but they're all basically the same idea. They show how channels evolve with a disturbance, what those intermediate stages are, and what a relatively stable, a system in that dynamic equilibrium that I mentioned earlier, what that would look like. So I talked about lateral stability. Here's just a case of an eroding bank. I'm sure you've all seen this in person or not, but as streams migrate, there's no vegetation, you have a mowed lawn, so potential response to restoring and addressing it is just come up and plant material here. But this bank is so high compared to the river bank that those roots would never get deep enough to actually protect that bank. So, you need to do more than just, go in there and plant it, just another example, here's a levee system. This is out in the Pacific Northwest. You have a big river all leveed up and bermed. The stream wants to meander. So, after a big storm, you end up with a sinuosity back in the river. We try to straighten rivers and get them to do what we want. But ultimately, the physics take over, and with big floods, the rivers do what they want. So a better strategy might have been, you end up losing more real estate, but to give the river the width it wants and let it meander within that, and develop outside of that. But then you don't have this impact on this recurring flooding. I talked about aggradation before, so you get loss of stream power. You have a high sediment loads. You end up with this material. So instead of having 4 or 5 feet of clearance under this bridge, you end up with half a foot, and then this causes flooding. The next flood event, water comes over, and the standard response is just go in there and dredge it out. But then you change that stream power and all those dynamics, and it comes back and degrades again, and it's just this recurring maintenance thing that becomes now. And every time you get in there and cut it, you're affecting the stuff that's going on in the stream, the biology, the chemistry, the stability, because then you're affecting things upstream potentially. This is the other extreme where you have this vertical stability, where you have this incision. So the stream bed used to be up here. This is where the culvert is. You can see this is, if they hadn't put the sheet piling in, this structure would have been long gone. But this stream bed's cut down 5-6 feet. And so there's just too much power in that stream, and it's just incising down. There's nothing to manage. So why does any of this matter? I talked about our propensity to straighten, dredge. The stream wants to meander, but we want it to go straight so we can use all this land. That picture was back in the 50s. This picture was a couple of years ago out in Western New York. Every time. We still do this, and it's not stable, but it ends up causing more problems. But we're continuing to do it. So we're kind of fighting the river instead of working with the river. We have this idea that rock will put rock riprap in, and that'll protect it, except the river's still trying to get that sinuosity back, because this one, low gradient system wants to meander, and it just moves that rock out of the way. So the answer is to put bigger rock in, maybe. But then the stream, now you have all that power I mentioned before, where you raise that stage because you constrict it. So now it cuts down. So you get degradation on the stream bed, and all the rocks fall in the stream. You could go to the extreme and just put concrete in and line the channel and have now it's just a water conveyance system. And as a society, if that's what we want to do, if we just want to convey water from the upper Neversink down to the Delaware, we could just line the whole thing with concrete and send it down. But that what happens to the fish and everything else, and obviously not something I'm advocating for. And sometimes even when you do build a stable rock channel, it goes back to so now you just have it's a water conveyance system. You have hardened banks. Water temperatures are up in here because there's no shade. You got all this rock that's attracting sunlight, heating up. There's very little life in here. If you go in here and do kicknet surveys for macroinvertebrates, there's probably not much in here. There's few fish, if any. Certainly not a healthy trout stream. Probably not a healthy stream for much, but it does convey water. So from a flood perspective, I guess it's good. This is a part of a control project, and it's conveying water out of this neighborhood into a bigger river downstream. So I basically just covered, again, a whirlwind tour, this pyramid. So starting from the water as it hits the landscape, how it enters into the channels, how that water in the channel interacts with the wood and the sediment transport. I didn't really talk about 4 and 5, the physiochemical and the biology, because there isn't a lot we can do to address. We can put more wood in the stream. That ties more into geomorphology than the habitat. The biological benefits to it are there. There's evidence that shows that more wood in streams is good. But from an engineering perspective, you have to show how that wood is stable and how the geomorphology of that stream isn't going to be adversely affected by inputting that wood. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes now and just kind of talk about or show you some projects, because I can't have a talk or a presentation without showing some projects, because it's fun to do so. This is a project out in Honeoye Inlet. The stream was channelized and put down, and we just re-meandered it through the floodplain, reconnected the floodplain. Powers that be wanted to put a big berm up here to impound water as a flood control project. We said, well, why don't you just raise the stream bed elevation, reconnect it to its floodplain. And this is shot right after construction. You can still see it. I haven't had a chance to get a recent drone shot. This was done about 3 or 4 years ago now. Just here on the right, this is Cayuga Inlet. This is an inlet to Cayuga Lake in central New York. You can see the railroad track up here. Big flood washed that out. This is kind of the aftermath. And we came in and did a kind of a full valley restoration here. The channels up here in the back. We have nice riparian wetland here. Replanted it. So we've reconnected a floodplain on both sides. We built a floodplain bench at the bottom of that old railroad embankment. You can kind of see this green building where my pointer is here. That's this green building here. So this railroad embankment all washed out. And so again, not just dredging it, leaving it 100 feet wide so that it would pass the next flood, because that wouldn't pass sediment. That would cause more problems. Trying to create a stable channel so it moves the sediment through, it moves the normal bed load through, but then on those big floods, it can come up and go into this floodplain, interact with these trees, all that roughness, slow water down, store some water here so that the flooding downstream is mitigated. And then obviously you're creating that habitat. I mentioned earlier on about that low flow and having that habitat for the fish. If you have a wide, shallow channel versus a small low flow or deeper low flow channel, creating that habitat in there. And there's wood structures in here for habitat for fish. This is that bank I showed earlier. This is how we addressed it. We put this tow wood structure in here, built a little flood bench. No rock involved, just armored the tow with these root wads. Great habitat under here, little pools. This is loaded with trout now. This is a project we took out a dam. Stepped it up so we didn't have all that sediment that was in the dam washing downstream. So again, just working with the river. Now you have a steeper valley. So you have these little plunge pools, step pools, working with a system with the geomorphology and the hydraulics of that to know what size channel, how to get those steps right. So fish, these are deepish pools here, and fish can get up there. We marked some brook trout downstream of here, and recaptured them upstream after the dam was removed. So that's all I have. As I said, we work with municipalities, landowners. If you have any questions, feel free to call me at the office. You can ask for either me or Carl Schwartz. He probably works more in your neck of the woods than I do. The two of us cover the whole state, so it's a big area. But feel free to give us a call, and we'll provide whatever assistance we can or point you to the right direction. So,
Thank you, Jan.
that's all I have. Thank you very much for your time.
Awesome. Really nice presentation. Jillian, I'm not sure I can see the chat. Are there any questions for Jan in the chat?
I'm not seeing any questions as of now, but everybody feel free to write some in and we'll definitely address them at the end.
Great, thank you. So Jan, we hope you can hang with us. There may be some questions at the end. If I understand your evenings, everybody's evening's precious, but we appreciate you taking the time.
I'll be here. Thanks.
Our second speaker is Stacy Howe. Stacy is joining us. She is the stream program coordinator for the Rondout Never Sink stream program, and Stacy has been involved in the very similar kind of work in the upper Never Sink watershed as we're talking about here for the whole watershed. So I'm certain that her experience and the work of her team will benefit our larger effort on the plan we're putting together. So Stacy, are you all set to go?
I think so.
Great, thank you for coming.
Hi, I am Stacy Hall. I'm the program coordinator for the Rondout Never Sink Stream program. And I'm just going to say hi quick and then stop sharing my screen to hopefully prevent any, or stop videoing to prevent any lag in the audio. Just want to show you I'm a real person. Okay. I work in the upper Never Sink watershed on the streams above the reservoir, and tonight I'm going to give some examples of some of the techniques we use in restoration work in our restoration work that's been completed to kind of expand on the stream dynamic principles that Jan presented on. First, a very brief overview of our program. We're part of Sullivan County Soil and Water Conservation District and operate through a contract with New York State Department of Environmental Protection. This program was started in late 2009, and there are similar stream programs in each of the soil and water conservation districts in the west of Hudson Reservoir watersheds. We're a small office of myself, Brendan Wagner, who's our restoration coordinator and I believe is on the call tonight, and Haley Springston, our watershed planning coordinator. Okay, there we go. So this green area is a map of our service area. I'm trying to get the little highlighter there. There we go. And of course, tonight our focus is on the Never Sink. The Never Sink headwaters begin in the town of Denning in Ulster County and split between two branches, east and west, which run approximately 11 and 13 miles respectively before converging to the main stem in the town of Claryville in Sullivan County. And then it flows about 8 more miles before entering the reservoir. The Never Sink reservoir was completed in 1953 and has a capacity of about 34.9 billion gallons of water. This part of the upper Never Sink is characterized by mature forests, steep streams, so that means it's very flashy and there's low development. This area is historic fisheries, and fortunately we have very few invasive species compared to other areas of the larger watershed. And the Never Sink is just one of 19 reservoirs that supply over 9 million people with 1.2 billion gallons of water daily. There we go. Back to our program, we work to protect and restore stream system stability and ecological integrity by providing for the long-term stewardship of streams and floodplains. And do that through many different channels. Tonight I'll be highlighting riparian buffer plantings and restoration projects, but we also provide grants for culvert and infrastructure improvement, education, outreach, and recreation, flood mitigation projects, and technical support to towns and landowners. Our buffer program is headed by Haley Springston, and she oversees the applications, project designs, and installations and maintenance. To date, we have revegetated 3.26 miles and 18 acres. This program is completely voluntary and provided at no cost to landowners. And this is a common site around the watershed. Many times when land is adjacent to streams, if it's grass dominated, we'll see property loss at this as the stream migrates laterally, as Jan mentioned. And as you can see in this picture, grass just doesn't provide the rooting depth to hold the bank together against the forces of water. Landowners often report losing many feet at a time of land. Another erosion picture here showing a mowed field. And this gets into a bad feedback loop. Once it starts, there's no roughness on the edge to slow the waters. So the faster water has a more destructive force. And as cobble is added to the stream, there can be localized aggradation, meaning that the channel bottom rises, contributing to widening of the channel and that introduces more erosion. So this channel is still trying to reach an equilibrium where it's going to be moving laterally. And this is also bad for habitat as there is no shade, and the introduction of sand and silt can be harmful for trout. And then of course the whole food chain is affected. And historically, the fix for erosion was to dump a bunch of rock or riprap along the bank. However, our program really tries to emphasize the important function of vegetation for whole stream health and long-term stability. Rock can get undermined over time and no longer work as intended, and then you're just dumping more money into the river. And with vegetation, as it matures, it becomes stronger while also providing shade to cool the waters, filter road runoff, and provide leaf litter for the food web. So we're kind of working up that functional pyramid that Jan showed. And this just illustrates the importance of rooting depth for bank stability. In addition to tree and shrub planting at the top of the bank, we use plant materials, typically native willow cuttings, to stabilize the slope of the bank down here. I'm going to give a few project examples, working my way up from smaller to larger, and that's in regard to techniques, not the actual project dimensions. Large slope zone is often used by highway departments to protect the adjacent road. We're trying a new technique at a couple of sites beginning in 2020, an attempt to grow vegetation on these mostly barren areas. The stone often creates large voids, so there's minimal area for plants to establish. We found a company that blows compost from a large hose that can really get in there to fill the voids. And then we went in and seeded and planted. So you can see the difference there. And establishing vegetation in these narrow buffers, this is like a really confined area. There's a steep slope here. The road is right here. Even if the rock is doing its job of protecting the road, it's important to help filter road sand, salts, and pollutants. The water is also warmed in these areas without shade protection, and when summer rain hits these large rocks in these areas, the water is warmed up on the rocks before entering the river. So introducing those vegetation there helps mitigate all that. Another technique we use typically is willow fascines. These are bundles of live willow twigs secured to the bank in horizontal steps or a singular row at the toe, depending on moisture conditions. Just an example of willow growth here, immediately after installation, and then here's after 2 growing seasons. And I just want to highlight and expand on what Jan had said. And when we're designing these projects, we look at the velocities, the shear stress, to see what these rivers in this area is going to tolerate. And these smaller restoration projects we're not addressing channel instability. So for a project to be eligible, it really has to have a stable channel already. For these types of projects, when we get into larger restoration projects, we address all of the stream dynamic issues. And another technique is soil lifts, which can help at sites where velocities and near bank shear stress are too high for fascines or other minimal methods, but low enough that rock is not needed. The steps are created with core coconut fiber, and that will biodegrade after several years once the vegetation is established. Between each step, willow cuttings are added. Native willow is fast growing, and roots from the branch cuttings, which make it ideal for this type of work. This site was experiencing significant erosion after an upstream debris jam at a split channel shifted more water towards this property. And there is a house within 50 feet of the top of this bank. So the owners were, of course, concerned as the bank retreated closer to their house. And here is the soil lifts after construction. This is 5 months post-construction. And the top picture is after 1 season of growth, and the bottom is after 5. The cobble bar also has significant herbaceous growth, which helps slow water and deposit sand and nutrients. And so far I've touched on how we've addressed bank erosion treatments at a smaller scale where the channel is relatively stable and just needs patchwork, so to speak. Full channel restoration addresses sediment transport, side to side, and vertical migration. And the first step in determining which sites will be addressed is a stream feature inventory, where we go out and assess various conditions in the river and identify these failing banks. Once a preliminary list of problem banks were identified, we went back and completed a survey of the banks, including a longitudinal profile, a cross-section profile, habitat, vegetation, and cobble assessments. And I've been very fortunate to have spent a lot of the earlier part of my career knee deep in some of the most beautiful rivers in the Catskill, which I'm incredibly grateful for. What that resulted in was a prioritization list. I don't expect anyone to really be able to read this, but it shows those survey inputs resulting in rankings for erosion hazard risk, recovery potential, near bank stress. Fine sediment or clay and threats to road or houses were also noted. And we were left with a list of about 50 sites that we've been ticking them off year by year. And also revisiting higher up sites to determine if there has been any self-stabilization or recovery, or measuring the rate of retreat. Fine sediment sources are at the top of the list, as that is the biggest threat to water quality and the biggest concern for DEP. This project was a significant source of clay to the West Branch Neversink. Anytime there was a little bit of rain or freeze and thaw, or even sometimes on dry days, if the ground was saturated enough, it would just bleed clay, as you can see here. The top picture is a wider shot of the bank, and the bottom is a few months before construction began. You can see there was retreat from the top of the bank in between these two pictures, where more trees have fallen down. The site is about 700 feet in length and 60 feet tall. The design included stabilizing the toe with root wads and soil lifts and adjusting the channel away from the toe of the bank. And this is just a quick shot of root wads. They have several functions in design, and they mimic what is found in natural settings. Tree trunks with the root ball attached are positioned upstream at an angle to create the new edge of the bank. The roots provide habitat for fish to hang out in, and also provide roughness to combat the force of water. And at this site, we installed undercut root wads, so they are cantilevered and create an even more desirable habitat where the water is slower and cooler and provides protection from predators. The top is an example of an undercut bank found in nature in our watershed, and the bottom is the design cross section typical. Happy fish there. The site also had boulder clusters and root wads that were added to the stream bed to achieve the desired channel roughness and habitat characteristics. Cross veins of large soapstone were added in the channel bottom to control how the flow is directed. Cross veins control the vertical elevation changes in the channel when we're installing the project. And a few pictures from construction, which is usually somewhat terrifying to see to me. It's always a case of it has to get worse before it gets better. And this is a close-up of root wad installation. Hemlock boards were added to the top of the logs to help support the soil lifts here. And core fabric and logs created the lift structure with willow between each layer. And finally, a finished product. The root wads are almost entirely submerged, and there's a nice deep pool in front of that. By design, the upper area of the bank was left alone. It may continue to slough off and retreat, and this bench will catch what falls, preventing fine sediment from entering the stream channel. The upper bank was also hydroseeded to help establish herbaceous vegetation growth. This is looking downstream from the toe of the bank. Here it's a bit easier to see the pool along the newly constructed bank and the riffle and cross veins at the downstream end before the river makes another bend. And just to the right of this tree line, there was a road. So there was not a lot of options when it came to adjusting the lateral pattern. This photo was right after construction, so the right cobble bar has since sorted itself out after a few higher flows, so it looks more natural and what you would expect to see on the inside of a bend. So just for Streams 101, when around the edge of a bend here, it's typically deeper on the outside and gets shallower towards the inside of the curve. These are slower velocities as you get towards the straighter areas of the stream. They're steeper. Those are the riffles. And this is just another glamour shot of the lifts. And I want to give credit to Brendan here. He oversees all aspects of the restoration projects from design to completion. And long-term project success is really dependent on the vegetation maturing. Two of the biggest lessons we've learned is protecting the new plants from herbivores and the importance of healthy soils. It's all, like, we're talking about stream dynamics here, but it's all really related for project implementation. You want to have successful vegetation to have these projects be successful in the long term. We've started putting in larger fences to protect the newly planted areas from deer herbivory and buck rub, installing metal screens around the trunks to prevent beaver and vole damage, and are currently working with a student on a research project to determine the effectiveness of adding owl nesting boxes to sites to reduce small mammal damage. They can girdle young trees. And Catskill sites come with a host of challenges regarding soil. Due to the history of glaciation and the terrain, many sites consist of glacial outwash, compacted till, and alluvium, which is cobble, resulting in low water holding capacity, low nutrients and biological availability, extreme turf and weed competition, among other things. There's also a history of tanning and acid rain in this area, affecting the nutrients in the soil. We've come to learn the importance of the quality of soil and restoration. Brendan has spearheaded an effort to improve the soil that is used at project sites to give the plants the best chance at success. And this could really be a several-hour talk in itself, so I'm only going to highlight that the work is being done. And healthy soils have a balance of the right physical, chemical, and biological makeup. There's a really complex food web within the soils that we never see, and it can be critical to the health of the new plantings. For example, grass lawns and fields that we often plant are bacterial dominated, while mature forests that we're trying to mimic are fungal dominated. So that has resulted in us adding mycorrhizal inoculants to our soil as we plant. And this area was used as a staging area for a project upstream. It had been washed out during Hurricane Irene. And in the repairs, the highway department heavily compacted this area and there was little vegetation growth. After it was used as a staging area, the first few feet of compaction were broken up, topsoil spread, and the test spots for different soil compositions were established. So there are 6 plots here, about 20 by 20 each, and they each have a different soil and amendment makeup. And then they were planted with the same tree species in the same pattern. The growth of each tree is being measured over time. Some of the amendments that are used are used as needed are a high quality compost mix, wood chips, the mycorrhizal inoculants, biochar, basalt, rock dust, solite, lime, gypsum, kelp, and humates. And again, this could be a whole nother presentation, but I just wanted to show that it's a consideration that we are working on with all of our restoration now. Questions? I see one hand. I don't know how to answer it though. That's
There are a couple of questions that came into the chat box. We can start with those. The first one is Peter Colasar is asking, as far as I know, there is very little, essentially no public access on the upper Neversink. Do you see a public rather than just a private benefit to this work?
Well, so to be clear, like we are funded by New York State DEP, which has a vested interest in protecting the water quality. So while some of this work is on private property, we're in people's backyards. So of course that's not going to be open for public use. And it's not necessarily public funds that are creating this restoration, these types of restorations, because it's, even though DEP is a public entity, they have the interest in protecting water quality. So I do think it's a benefit to the public as a whole, because as the stream banks, especially clay inputs, are addressed, you're seeing those benefits all the way downstream. The reduction in turbidity has long-reaching benefits for even when it makes it to public fishing areas.
Thank you. There's one other question, which is there a way to link the restoration prioritization list to parcel data in GIS?
Not easily. They each have an identifier number, and then and that prioritization list is on our website, and then the identification numbers are referenced within each management unit within the whole management plan. So no, it's not. It's can be done, but not easily. Like we know where it is within our GIS system, but that is not publicly available.
Okay.
But if anyone's curious, just send me an email and I'll be happy to show you where maybe your parcel is on the prioritization list.
Stacey, this is Kate Rahman from Natural Lands. We're working with Sullivan County on some of the mapping for this project. Could I email you and talk to you about what those unique identifiers mean?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
And I believe that the hand that was raised is no longer raised, so it might have been an accidental hand raised.
And I just want to go back to that question too. So this was specifically about restoration projects, and those areas that are addressed may fall on public lands. We also do quite a bit of restoration with the towns for improving culverts and public infrastructure protection where the streams and the roads meet. So there's also public benefit in that sense.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Stacy. wait, we have one more question that just came in here. Is this watershed management plan being coordinated with New York State DEC's Never Sink River Unit Management Plan? So we do have New York State, we have a couple of New York State reps on our steering committee. So we are coordinating with them to the greatest extent we possibly can. Are there any other last minute questions? If anyone wants to just ask a question, you can raise your hand as well and we can unmute you. All right, well, thank everyone so much. Special thanks to our speakers. That was really, really great presentations. And oh, wait. Grace Woodard is asking, what is the biggest issue with planting?
I would say deer protection. They can really do a number on a newly planted area, and the soil health. Just a lot of these areas that we are planting are floodplain areas that have seen either a lot of cobble deposits, low nutrient. So we have to, when we go in, it's hard planting conditions, and we also have to have adequate soil for plant development. There's another question, replanting restoration, is maintenance money always built in? And we try to plan for maintenance for at least 5 years. That's the commitment that we give landowners when they sign on. And there have been projects where we have to go back and do replanting or just minimal maintenance, depending on what has happened or what the conditions are. It is not uncommon to have finished a project and then we get a flood before vegetation is established. That has happened on more than several occasions, but we do plan for that for funding wise so that we can go back. Do we have stats on success and failure projects? We do vegetation monitoring every on the first year after installation, third and fifth. So we go back to the project sites and we measure the growth of trees and other factors, just to record all that. So those stats are, we have them. They're not in a easily shareable format.
All right, and there's one question kind of in the mix here. Is there funding for municipalities to do restoration work? And I'm going to say that as part of the grant that funds this work right now, there is some work to do some culvert replacements in the town of Fallsburg. But part of the motivation behind doing this project is to eventually develop a project list very similar to what Stacy put up on the screen before for the lower Never Sink as well. And then, you know, FUDR and our other partners are committed to, you know, going out and finding funding and matching that up with, you know, we'll start with highest priority projects and go from there. In the summer of 2022, we actually did an inventory of over 1,100 culverts in the watershed. And so that's, you know, just the beginning of what that project list will be. So we now have a pretty good understanding of, you know, where the highest priority culverts are that need to be replaced. That's just one example of kind of next steps in this process and how we'll get funding to do the actual work. And if Stacy, if you have anything else to add to that, feel free.
No.
Okay, well, thank you all so much. We will make this available. If you didn't see the message that I put in the chat, you can sign up to be on our mailing list if you want the recording to be mailed or emailed directly to you and to be put on our mailing list for future meetings. So feel free to sign up for that. And we hope to see you at the next one.